14-year-old accused of murder be charged as an adult? Not in all cases, but in certain cases.
I think that you make the right point. I think that the totality of circumstances has to be considered. I think the more important question is, how do we stop a 14-year-old from committing murder? And frequently what we found is a violent 14-year-old that's committed murder has committed a whole slew of crimes before that. And so what we argue is that our system has to hold young people accountable early in the process and stop them before they get to violent crime. And so while we passed an omnibus bill with the support of the council this week, I signed it this week, we still have work to do, especially with youth offenders. We are a city, of course, that focuses on rehabilitation for all offenders and especially for young people. But young people who are using guns and committing crimes of violence, we know that we have to hold them accountable. Letting them go into diversion programs is not serving them well, and is certainly not serving the public at large well.
Wow. Much more of that, which is rare from a big city mayor in America today. That is DC Mayor Muriel. We had this chance to sit down with her at City Hall. And when we come back, we'll be in our broadcast house, C, here in Washington, D.C. also. So let's have at it. You know, members of the GOP House are considering a bill that will roll back a law that allows people ages 18 to 24 convicted of a crime go through the DC Youth Rehabilitation Services. Understanding DC's right to home rule, would you urge your council to take up that measure to support the council? And would you support the council if they did?
I would support the council looking very carefully. We call it the YRA affectionately. And this is why, because it was expanded in ways that I think didn't have enough public debate during the kind of pandemic years. So I think I would discourage the Congress from legislating locally, which, you know, they want to do that. They can do that in their hometowns. But I would encourage our council, as we go through this reset of our public safety ecosystem, to make sure that the elements of the YRA make sense.
How tough is it? Because, you know, you are seen as reasonable, but it seems as though, and you know, we love these labels, that you're working with a woke council. And I know privately you've had to work hard to get this legislation where it is today. And I know I don't expect you to criticize your council members because you got to work with them. But what is it that needs to change in Washington, D.C. between your council and the mayor? Because it's not as if crime is the only issue that you deal with that's important to the nation overall.
Well, I'm strong. You know, my job is to work with the council that the people send me. And people come to this work with different ideologies, different backgrounds, and different beliefs. And my job is to set a bold vision for the city and to work with them on the visions that they have to produce the best initiatives, balance budgets, and execute for the people of the District of Columbia. Now, my job is different. So is theirs post-pandemic, because now we are focused on the economic comeback of our city, and therein too, we see our numbers trending in the right direction. What we saw with the pandemic was people go home and work from their homes. This week, we saw the highest ridership day on our metro, including federal workers. So we see more people coming back. When we look at the nightlife in our city and weekends in our city, it's all the way back. So our theaters, our sporting venues, concerts, packed with people, restaurants packed with people. We had the #1 per capita restaurant starts in the nation. So people are still looking to Washington, D.C. as a great place for opportunity to start and grow their restaurants. So all of those things are key indicators of a city that has good and solid financials. And like all cities, we're adjusting to the new way of work and how people are working. But even then, we see those numbers trending in the right direction.
You mentioned something that's very important. Federal workers back on the subway. What a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of your buildings have been empty. People have not returned to work, and you're fighting for revenue. And there's much in the news today about the Wizards and the Capitals leaving, going to Virginia, but it seems like that has been stopped in this strike, but we know politics. And then you have been diligently negotiating, bringing the Washington Commanders back to Washington, D.C. The point I'm making, sports revenue is very important to your city.
No, absolutely. Hospitality is important to our city. When we look at our numbers, by the way, our CFO released our revenue estimates recently, and our revenues are growing in the city, not as fast as we've had a roaring economy, mind you, where revenues have gone up like this, and post-pandemic, they're flatter, but they're still rising. But our hospitality sector has rebounded the greatest of all of our sectors. So tourism, restaurants, all manner of entertainment, including sports, and our theater and concert business has been through the roof. So I sometimes chuckle at people because if you listen to some of the real estate folks, you would think DC was a ghost town. It's far from a ghost town. We don't have all of our daytime traffic back, but we have our nighttime and weekend traffic back, and our tourists. Right now, we're coming up on one of the most glorious times of the year in Washington, our cherry blossom season. Peak bloom will be March 23rd, and already I see the travelers, the young people out and about in our city.
Now, did you intentionally not want to talk about the Wizards and the Capitals and the Commanders?
No, I talk about them all the time.
So let's talk about bringing that iconic team back to Washington, D.C., and why that's important, not only to the revenue, but to the fabric and the identity of our nation's capital.
Yes, absolutely. So let me step back, because sometimes people forget that we are a city of neighborhoods and not just the White House and the Capitol. Like, real people live here, real businesses are made here, real people are raising their families here. And we enjoy culture. That's part of the big attraction of DC, why there really is no other place like us. You have the cultural attractions, you have a restaurant, nightlife scene, but you also have great sports. And I have made it a hallmark of my time in office to let people know that we are really a sports capital. And in the time that I've been mayor, we've won a World Series, a Stanley Cup. Our women's basketball team has won a championship. DC United has won a championship, and thousands of people have come to the district to enjoy all of those things. And the city has been a partner with pro sports teams, including what is now Capital One Arena. It used to be the MCI Center when Abe Poland made the bold decision to locate his NHL and NBA franchise in the heart of Chinatown. On his own dime. The city partnered with the Major League Baseball League to build a world-class baseball stadium. We partnered with Monumental Sports to build a practice facility and home of the Washington Mystics. We built Audi Field. And now we're very focused on maintaining our relationship with Monumental Sports. They made a lot of money in downtown DC. And we have a real deal on the table, not a fantasy deal. We have an approvable deal on the table that's already been endorsed by 13 council members, not one that's looking for, a sponsor. So we're going to continue to work with them and hope they make the right decision about Chinatown. But if they don't, we have an extraordinary group of professionals, developers, restaurateurs that are looking at 5 prime acres in the middle of downtown Washington that can make that a fabulous development for us. So we're excited about that. Now, the jewel is RFK. And so since I've been mayor, my focus has been how do we get control of it? It's 170 acres in DC. No, DC is compact, so 170 acres is a big thing. And we're getting very close now to having complete control of that parcel so that we can have a wonderful mixed-use development.
You know, in February, your office opened the district's first safe commercial corridor hub in Chinatown. You were just discussing Chinatown. Yeah. What exactly is that, and how does it benefit the residents of our nation's capital?
Well, it is it's a new creation. So it is part police substation, and it is part human services hub, and we pushed them together. And our police chief felt very strongly that we have an outpost for police from the districts in a couple of hot spots in the city. And so we're going to open 3. And the first one we opened on 8th Street Northwest in Chinatown. And I think so far it's been a great success. So we have our community services staff, our mental health and substance abuse staff, human services staff, and our police substation. And that is our Safe Commercial Corridors Hub.
Who are the recipients of the grants and the purposes of the grants?
Well, we have both the hubs, which the city is operating, and we look to our nonprofit partners, including bids, to implement some of the grant funds that we put out. And we expect what they will do is have, almost adjunct public safety personnel, like community ambassadors, people to welcome everybody, people to look out for if there is a missing street light, people to call in if there is one of our residents that needs some help, or we need an agency out to do extra cleaning. So those types of activities are Safe Commercial Corridors work, in addition to activation. So we want them to be thinking about if we have a vacancy, are we introducing people to look at that space? Are we thinking about pop-up activity in that space, or are we thinking about other events?
One of the misconceptions of you is that you embraced the defund the police movement. That was never the case. You've always been strong on law enforcement, giving law enforcement the tools that are necessary to fight this violent crime and homicides. But you also have a reality that you have a shrinking police force. How do you rebuild the morale of law enforcement officers? How do they feel as though that their hands are not tied behind their back? They arrest a juvenile one day and they're back on the street 2 days later. Right. How do you give them the encouragement that they can do their jobs?
Well, first of all, it can't be all talk. We actually have to change laws, and we've gone a long way to doing that. We actually had a law in place that prevented police to pursue violent offenders in their vehicles in a way that the police could be in line with the law. So we got that changed, and that's important. We had a law that prevented our police from looking at body-worn camera before writing their reports. And any discrepancy would be used by public defenders to discredit them in a prosecution, which stopped prosecutors from prosecuting. And so we changed that in the law. We even had a piece of legislation moving that would make every bit of their personnel records public, unlike any other government employee. So we moved to change that in the law. So what I explained to my team is that we have to remove all recruitment killers from the law and from our policies. But we also have to change the way we talk about policing. And I think that we see that movement happening too, because that's also important. Policymakers from this building shouldn't be talking about the police like they're the enemy. They're partners in the public safety of our city. But at the same time, just like if we have people committing crimes, if we have law enforcement who aren't doing the right thing, they also have to be held accountable. And we have those provisions in our law as well.
You know, in 2023, law enforcement only were able to solve 45% of the homicides in this city. How do we make it more efficient for law enforcement to bring these people to justice, respond to people who are in crisis in the real moment of crime, where they're not waiting hours and hours and hours, and by that time, they've lost their lives, they're injured, and all other kinds of things that make them insecure and feel as though that law enforcement and the city resources don't work for them?
Well, I'm happy to say that even with diminished numbers, our police response times are in expected margins. And so we continue to focus on that. Other parts of our public safety system are our 911 call takers. We recruit because we need the best of the best picking up the phone, and we are hiring. And we're looking for people who want to do that very stressful work. Closing homicides has to be the top priority of the Metropolitan Police Department. You know, I don't have to tell you the old adage, if you get away with murder, then you're just not a safe city. And so we work hand in hand with our community. Oftentimes, homicide closure is directly related, in my opinion, to how much the community trusts the police, because somebody knows. And we're working very diligently to drive that down.
You know, you have a housing in downtown program where you're giving $50 million in tax breaks for office conversions downtown. Why is this important?
It's hugely important because we know, even in neighborhoods in DC that have more residential, a better balance, in our downtown, we're about 90% commercial office buildings. So that it shouldn't surprise you then that the kind of narrative around the downtown is highly focused on office workers, even though I told you our evening and weekends are very vibrant. So to get a better mix, we have to have more people living downtown. So I've set a goal of 15,000 new residents, probably going to blow that out of the water. I toured this week a great conversion that's happening in downtown that is going to welcome like 160 new residents, great amenities that you can walk to, and we know people are going to love it.
You know, I must tell you, DC is a very expensive city, according to my family, when they come. And the $1 million homes are swallowing DC housing market at a whopping 20% in listings that are really out of the reach for most people. How do we make it affordable? Not saying that you should make it affordable. The marketplace should decide that. But I know this is something that you're very sensitive to.
No, we should have affordable housing in all cities. We know that cities are amenity rich, right? So if you live in a city, you have access to great transportation, great arts and culture, great schools. You have access to restaurants. And so people want to live in cities, and they still do. And so we want more people to be able to afford it, especially if you're a person like me who was born and raised here. So I see it as the city's job is to support people with a great education and training for the jobs, the good paying jobs that we have in Washington, D.C. But more than that, as mayor, I've invested more in affordable housing programs per capita than any jurisdiction, mayor or governor, in the United States in the last 9 years, over $1.5 billion. And because of that, we're going to hit our goal of creating 36,000 new housing units by 2025.
Do you, in this presidential cycle that we find ourselves in, do you think the definition of leadership, what we see in the House now where a lot of people are leaving, they just don't want to do it anymore, they don't find it worthy anymore, you cannot find the best people to run for office? Do you think that that our democracy is dying? Is there something that continues to give you hope? That people will step up to the plate and run and want to make the sacrifices for the leadership?
Well, I do think you point out reasons why public office is not attractive to a lot of people, but I continue to encourage people, even locally. I told somebody when I ran for my first elected office as a council member, 17 people were in that race. Now the same seat, there are like 3 people in the race. Why is that? And so we have to get good people to run for these offices, and we need to explore, why. Is it the constant social media and the barrage? Is it the family demands? Is it pay? Is it security? Like, we need to figure those things out because we do need good people to serve.
And finally, why do you continue to do it? And do it with such a smile and such humility and such grace? Why?
This is the best job that matches my passions, my beliefs. And after being elected 3 times, somebody told me, you say you're the only Black woman to be elected 3 times as mayor of a major American city. And I said, I think that's true. But then he goes, but you're the longest serving big city mayor in America right now. And that's also true. And so when I look back, I've served with 3 presidents, every iteration of congressional leadership. I've served in a pandemic, now post-pandemic. So I know how to do this job. And I feel very strongly that my city needs me to do it right now.
Well, listen, we appreciate your sitting down with us on our show. My problem is I just have such respect for you.
Thank you.
So
that's not a problem.
And I say that based on that I clearly understand what you sacrifice and what you do for the city every day, against the perceptions and against the rumor mill. You hang in there because the one thing I do know, you love the city. You love Washington, D.C., and you give it your best. And I certainly appreciate that. I think sometimes we beat up on our national leaders and sometimes we just don't give them credit. And the Bible says, if you find something good, praise it. And you're a good human being, doing a good job for the city. And I appreciate your sitting down with us to share this with our national audience. And we wish you well.
Thank you. Thank you, Armstrong.
I'm Armstrong Williams, and that's it. Oh, that's not it. Because we're back in the studio, in Studio C, in our broadcast house. And when we come back, Joe Freeman from the Heritage Foundation will join us along with others to discuss the mayor's comments about crime, what else is going on in the city. And don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. And welcome back to our broadcast house with Ed Martin and Joel Griffith. You seem somewhat surprised at the firm position and the grasp of understanding of what our D.C. mayor, she has on what's necessary to enforce the law and stop this high crime rise in this city an example for the rest of the nation.
Yeah, and I'd say as a long-term resident of D.C., I lived there for 10 years. I experienced a lot of that rise in crime, the deterioration of those neighbors over the past few years. And what I took away from the interview she did with you is that she does seem to recognize some of the drivers of that, including the lack of holding young adults accountable early on in order to prevent them from committing the more serious crimes later. And a large number of those crimes, as you know, that are occurring in D.C. right now with the carjackings, the homicides, the robberies, are committed by a younger subset of the population, many of whom got their start in criminal activity when they were just in high school.
You know, Ed Martin, she was clear that in certain cases, 14-year-olds should be tried as adults, because when you find that they committed this homicide, which is a tragedy for other families, you realize they have an entire criminal sheet, that they just didn't start committing murders. They were involved in other activities. And one other thing she said, sometimes rehabilitation and putting them in certain places for them to get therapy is not always the answer. Sometimes you must treat them as adults.
Yeah, first of all, let me say, Armstrong, it was a good format for her to do that interview with you. I mean, you're good at that, all these years of experience. She was very impressive. I have never seen her in such a setting where she had she was engaging, excuse me, on the topic. She had both a sensitivity and I think a depth of understanding. So I agree with you. I think you put your finger on, both of us, or both of you and your guest, on what a bigger problem is. The system is failing a lot of young people, right? The school system is not working. The basics of living together in D.C. It's hard to ask these kids when they get to 13 or 14 and they've been behind and the schools have been failing them in many ways. And they're let's be fair, the family structure. We don't blame anyone for it, but the family structure is very difficult for these kids. They're up against odds where you can wish that they would get 3 or 4 years of better rehab and they would be good, but as you point out, it's pretty unlikely. So you've got to change your mindset on the 14-year-olds. I hate to say it, you don't ever write them off, but you have to treat them like they're a problem that's not going to be easy to fix. Then I think you need to be a little bit more dramatic on the problem in D.C. for the families and for younger kids and schools. And even though I like how she handled it, D.C.'s got a problem. They lost the big sports teams, as you alluded to, or at least it looks like they did. They have a vacancy problem in the district now. A large number of the federal employees are allowed to work from home, which is changing the dynamic here in terms of the tax base. So she's got a really unique set of problems. I think she's up for it, but I don't know if it's just about policing that is going to improve the environment. I think you've got to look a little bit broader than that.
Joel, you should be very careful what you wish for, because sometimes you might get it. Texas criminalized illegal immigration across the borders with the corollary obligation of state deportation. Now, the United States Supreme Court this week declined to override a stay of a circuit court's order blocking a federal district court's injunction against the Texas law as clearly unconstitutional. But Texas cannot force Mexico, Joe, to accept deportees. No, they can't, which it will not. And meanwhile, violent crimes of homicide and theft will go unenforced, while Texas law enforcement is diverted to arresting and jailing illegal immigrant women and children. And finally, 5 Supreme Court justices indicated they will vote against the Texas law when it reaches them on the merits in this case. It appears that Texas has shot itself in the foot.
Well, Texas has been forced to do the job of the federal government. Our executive branch is arranged in order to actually enforce our borders and enforce immigration law, and this administration has abjectly failed on that. I think regardless of how the Supreme Court ultimately decides on the Texas enforcement actions, Texas will continue to stand firm, and they can do this in multiple ways. Enforcing the basic law overall. If you're committing even simple crimes or thefts, throw the book at these individuals and make Texas an example of how to have the sternest law enforcement in the country. But second of all, Texas can do their part in continuing to refuse to dole out these benefits to those who are unlawfully. And New York can continue on that mission of being a magnet, of drawing in illegal immigrants to their city. But I'm confident that Texas legislators will stand firm. They're not going to be handing out cash debit cards and free housing to individuals. And thirdly, one way that Texas can continue to stand firm, regardless of a Supreme Court ruling to the contrary, is to enforce basic employment law, which forbids the employment of those who are here illegally. And that could include going after employers, which Texas does on occasion, going after employers who are skirting the law by employing those who do not have a right to work in this country.
You know, Ed Martin, on Monday, in oral arguments in Murphy versus Missouri, Justice Ketanji Jackson Brown turned the First Amendment on its head and warned that it should not hamstring government, Ed, and enlisting social media to censor messaging it dislikes. Why not? First Amendment icon Justice Louis Brandeis taught a century ago, Ed, that the remedy for allegedly false speech is more speech, not enforced silence. And so the government's notoriety for serial lying, and I'm going to say lying, has created a credibility gap with the public when it speaks. It needs to end the credibility gap. Getting social media to censor is an unconstitutional diversion.
Well, first of all, let me amazingly rise in defense of the justice in this manner. Oral arguments are famous for crazy questions and crazy comments. I sat through a lot of them at the Court of Appeals when I was clerking. You see some really crazy things said. So I agree with you. I read what she said, and I thought to myself, how can she mean that? And the bigger worry is when you listen to the broad arguments. And again, you shouldn't try to step away from a Supreme Court argument and think you got the numbers added up. But it sure looked like a number of the justices that were the number closer to 5, and maybe 6, that we're going to say they're allowed to do this kind of pressure. Because remember, at the heart of this, as you point out, is the ability of the government to pressure these tech giants to censor speech. And if you ask the tech giants, they'll sound a lot like what you'll sometimes hear, like a Grover Norquist or somebody talking about the overregulation of America. They'll say the businesses are told, hey, you know, we'd really like you to help us in this disinformation campaign. And if you're Meta, you say to yourself, I got so many things in front of this government, so many ways they can hurt me, I better get along with them. And that pressure is real. So I think she was wrong on that. I think that what she said was absolutely wrong. I think the bigger problem is we have a government that we don't even know what they're doing. We don't even know the pressure. You don't even know what the FISA courts are approving in terms of how it's happening to not just our data, but to what they do with the data. So we're in a strange moment, driven in large part by the size of the government and the power of it, the federal government, and the technology, which makes it so many things possible. And the TikTok ban is wrapped up in the middle of it. But I didn't think the Supreme Court didn't look good for what I think is the traditional jurisprudence of the First Amendment when we saw those arguments on Monday.
You know, let me come to you, Joel, and the judge's classified document request. To me, it was highly irregular for the judge in Florida with the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. It was to ask for alternate jury instructions when the law is clear or before a trial begins. The instructions are supposed to not sort of send them down a foxhole, whether you gather the information before anything has been gathered around the trial. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what is it. It's so bizarre. What is she asking for?
Yeah, no, you're so right. If you've had a chance to serve on a jury, for me, I've only gone to law school, haven't done the jury work, but when you're a judge and you're delivering instructions to a jury, those instructions are supposed to be clarifying, helping to direct the way in which that conversation is actually going to go on the jury, because you're determining whether somebody is guilty or not for purposes of the law. And when that message becomes convoluted, you really do run the risk of a jury meandering from actually making a determination.
But it's a delay. It's a delay tactic. It is obviously a delay tactic, Ed. Come on.
Well, Armstrong, if I may, I think what the judge was basically saying, and you can now call this a delaying tactic, she was saying to both sides, tell me what you think the jury instruction should be, and that forces both sides to have to say the basics of the theory of their case. And of course, the defense can change theirs all along the way, but she's basically saying to the prosecutors, without saying it, I don't really know what the heck you're doing here, so show me what your jury instruction is so I can see your roadmap, because I'm not really playing along very well. Now, you might say that's a delaying tactic. I think it's a much bigger threat to the prosecutors, because she may look at it and say, yeah, you don't have a path that I think makes sense for all of this, or if that's your path, I'm going to go over there and give these guys a lot more discovery. They wanted a skiff to look at some of this stuff. We've so far held them off. So I think it does bode very poorly for the prosecutors. But this is it's uncommon to do it early, but it's not uncommon for a judge to be looking at both sides as a way to see where the path of the case is going and assess some of the relevance and some of what she wants to decide in terms of letting people take a harder look this way or a harder look that way, or even throw some of the counts out.
You know, of all that I've read and we covered this week and what we call citizen journalism, this to me is the most outrageous. The Washington Post and mainstream columnists, and there's no doubt in my mind it's coming from the White House, and Newsweek fired the first blow, saying they believe Donald Trump has dementia. They believe that Donald Trump does not have the mental acuity that run for president. They had these so-called psychiatrists saying that from their estimation, from watching both candidates, Joe Biden has no cognitive skills. Joe Biden, and just bear in mind, Donald Trump passed both tests with flying colors. Joe Biden refuses to take the cognitive test. And you ask why people distrust the media? When you see this misinformation, disinformation, propaganda saying Donald Trump is the one that's on the decline, not Joe Biden, to sort of wrap the mainstream PR machine around him, to make us feel like we're stupid and dumb, Ed? Can you believe this?
Well, of course I can believe it, because it's shameless. I think you're drawing an important, usually in a campaign, the two parties, the two candidates will do this kind of thing. Like if you have a weakness, let's say that you have a weakness in terms of your faithfulness to your spouse, you'll attack the other on that topic and try to muddy it up. Usually it's mano to mano, in terms of, you're right though, the Washington Post carrying the water, the Newsweek carrying the water, and we're going to see that we're seeing this over and over again. I have called it, Armstrong, the narrative machine. The narrative machine is big tech, big government, and big media, and they work together to put this message out. And I don't think they're going to stop. They've tried to say that Donald Trump, he misspoke about his wife's name when he was clearly referring to Mercedes Schlafly in the second row or something. So, but they made a big deal out of that. They have to, because Joe Biden is in front of our faces, is falling apart, and so they have to do something to try to muddy the water up. But you're right that it's the Washington Post is a new low.
I have to tell you, I hate to say this. I respect the president. I pray for him. I feel sorry for him. But he is literally declining every week before our very eyes. And for them to try to turn their focus on Donald Trump, they become enablers for the president's deterioration. They make him believe, and Biden wants to believe that you can see him skipping and trying to be young, but he can't. He's old. I'm sorry. He's old. He can't do it. He's doing the best he can. It's not his fault. But for the media to create a narrative, buddy, you're okay, you've never been better, it's just a pathetic lie. And we'll be back.
Sorry.
We'll be back. We'll be
All
back.
right.
Ridiculous. That's just ridiculous.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, I want to come back to political correctness, people using intimidation to cancel people they don't want to hear. So I don't know if you're familiar with Jewish musician Morticia Yahu, who gave a performance this week at the 930 Club here in Washington, D.C. It went off without a hitch. Why? Joel, you know about this. Because Mayor Bowser authorized law enforcement to reinforce throughout the area he was performing. But why does he need extra law enforcement? This is the question you should ask. It's because there are those out there who accuse the artists of incorporating reggae, hip-hop, alt-rock, pop, and ideas of freedom in Israel into his music. And for art washing racism, this is exactly what it is, and Zionism and co-opting black music. What? But guess what? He's not even Israeli, but he is Jewish. And to the pro-Palestinian protesters who have shut his concerts down in Arizona, New Mexico, and Illinois, that's all that matters. It frightens them. These vile anti-Semites care only about one thing. If you're Jewish, you are the enemy. It's obvious when you consider this case. They don't care where he's from or that his songs are primarily about unity. They care just about the fact that he's a Jew, and that shouldn't tell you everything you need to know about the pro-Palestinian movement, Joe.
Yeah, it was shocking last night to walk to that show and to walk by, I would say, about 75 of these pro-Hamas agitators that were in the streets with their sloganeering, with their chants. And those chants, and make no mistake, when somebody's chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they're talking about removing the Jewish people from the land that has belonged to them for millennia. So to Mayor Bowser's credit, the show did go on. The crowd was allowed to block part of the street. I think they should have been arrested just for that. That's not free speech. That's disorderly conduct. But unlike in Chicago and unlike in New Mexico, the show did go on last night. It was a beautiful performance, speaking of peace, about love, about faith, and it was a beautiful night with many hundreds of people.
And let me just say this. These pro-Palestinian groups lauded the cancellation of the shows that Joe just mentioned. They threatened unruly protests. They did all of this because they didn't want a Jew's voice to be heard by the public. It's sickening. It's vile. And it's a sad reality that we're facing today. So more kudos to Mayor Bowser for having the backbone to say, not on my territory. It will not happen in the nation's capital, Ed Martin.
Well, and the interesting thing to me is how violent they are. These protesters, they're not making no qualms about how they're going to be violent. And I have to say, I'm in appreciation of the mayor and how it was handled. And you know, in some ways, other places, Illinois, couldn't get under control, which says something. But it's a level of anger and violence that these protesters are brought that is different. You know, I was really active in politics in Missouri when Ferguson happened and the Michael Brown situation, and it went on for days and days. And I remember there was not a lot of understanding of how to manage some of the violence. A lot of it was happening at night, of course, and the different topic. But the violence of these protests against, especially in this case, Israelis and the Jewish people, it's much different than we've seen in a long time. And again, how we manage it is important, but that it's happening is something else too.
I say just a few weeks ago in D.C., pro-Hamas agitators shut down the freeway outside Reagan Airport. And in fact, we know that there are 5 or 6 501c3s that marketed for that shutdown and boasted that they achieved the shutdown. And I would say to your listeners, if you were stuck in that traffic jam and missed an appointment or missed a flight, reach out to me. I'll get you connected to a law firm that will actually go ahead and help you go after those pro-Hamas agitators.
But let me tell you what's unfortunate about this. You also expect people like us, when we see them shutting down the highway, knowing we're trying to catch flights, or we're off to an emergency situation. And then you have the emergency vehicles that are shut down too. I've seen people who just run them over. That's what you incite. I said, just run them over. And don't care, because not everybody's going to have the same temperament. So while they play this game, it is a very dangerous game from them, which they could lose their life, they could be harmed and injured for life. So play that game. You play that game at your own risk. Now, this is a story. I just want to share this story. Now, this story is off the charts. I don't even know if you've heard this story. A quadriplegic man who is paralyzed from the shoulders down, Joe and Ed, was just seen on a video playing chess. Now, get a load of this. He didn't speak commands. He didn't use his hands, didn't use his feet, or any other physical inputs. But how did he do it? He used his mind. It is out of this world. It's this Neuralink, the brain and implant company created by Elon Musk, implanted a device into his brain that allowed him to control anything connected to the device. The man described the feeling as using the force on the mouse cursor to move it wherever he wants to. It may be possible, guys, that humans and machines become one in the near future, completely blurring the lines of what it means to be a human. This could be a major step in the advancement of technology and possibly the human race. Ed, if this technology continues to advance at the pace that it's advancing, we may see neural implants become more mainstream, strengthening our ability to think and perform tasks never thought possible. But you're going to say, are we playing God? No. I'm going to say I've got a child. I've got teenagers with a smartphone. They've already melded their mind with a piece of technology. They're already half robots. No, look, we're the generation, and some of the younger viewers may not remember. Remember when Christopher Reeves was paralyzed, and then he spent the rest of his life being an advocate. Think about how empowering it could be for people that are disabled to be able to have this technology and everything else. It's senior citizens who won't be able to do the same kinds of things they can do, and suddenly they have the ability. No, it's an extraordinary gift. I'm not saying play God. There's other moments we play God. It's an extraordinary gift. I do think we need to have people like us and others talking, deeply about how we use the tools, right? And what it means for us and how the ethics of it are. But no, it's very, very exciting. I did see that story, and I thought the first thing I thought of was the Christopher Reeves. There was a young child when I was a boy who was paralyzed, a young man who later died, and the possibilities for people that are without is extraordinary. But it's like science fiction, because you start to say, well, are we just our minds? Are our bodies completely irrelevant? It's almost troubling, but also exciting. One of the things we try to do on the show is bring light news, fascinating news, like those stories. But Putin did say this week, we're as close to World War III and nuclear war than we have ever been. Do we take him serious? How do we respond, Joel?
Well, I think our leaders have to take remarks by Putin seriously, if only for the fact that he has followed through on his actions in invading his neighbor and invading Ukraine. I think this is an important moment this next year for the world's democracies to stand together. Putin has a threat not just to his neighbor, but he's a threat to other of our allies as well. And I think it's important for our leaders in both parties to speak very clearly regarding Putin. He is not a friend of ours. He is not a friend of our civilization. He is someone with whom we need to speak boldly about. And I wish our friends in Ukraine well in their fight against a villainous dictator.
Ed Martin, could Robert Kennedy Jr. be a wild card in this year's presidential election, if it's close in places like Michigan? If it's close in places, they're certainly, just like Dr. Stein in 16 played a role. But at this point, Armstrong, you and I talked off air. Being a candidate for president, especially, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And a lot of the details of it are raising money and ballot access. And in the last 48 hours, or maybe a week or so, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's clear he's not raising more money. He's sort of stuck where he is. His outside PAC, which raised a boatload of money, it has said they're going to stop pushing ballot access. So he's going to get on in the ballot in a handful of states. And as you point out, it could be a factor in one of those places. But pretty quickly, people start sorting towards the major parties for voting. And I think he'll be, there may be articles and essays written for decades about how he did play a role in Pennsylvania or something, but it doesn't look like he's going to be a major factor at this point, no. How important is Donald Trump's vice presidential selection?
Look, I think it's very important. Former President Trump's pick could go a long way to patching the relationship up with a number of those in the Republican Party who view him as not conservative enough on a number of issues. If we think about the spectrum of issues related to free trade or the importance of reforming our spending system, our entitlement programs, during this last campaign, very little was said from him on these important issues. And I think there's a very strong element, maybe a minority element within the Republican Party, within conservatives in general, that really do want to know that the next president, if it is a Republican, will actually address these issues that our economic future depend on. We can't have another 4 years of us going further and further into debt without our long-term insolvency being resolved. If we don't make these changes now, God, 10 years from now, if we're forced to keep those printing presses going to fund government operations, this inflation situation we experienced the last 3 years, it's going to be an extended period of time.
You know,
But
I am.
Okay, all right.
So, President Trump this week used the term bloodbath. We know someone say he was talking about the auto industry, but I actually saw the Wall Street Journal follow-up where they pointedly asked him about this to clarify what he meant. And he refused to clarify what he meant by bloodbath if he's not elected. Ed?
Well, look, I mean, if you haven't seen the compilation of every major political figure and media person using the term bloodbath, then you're missing something great. Everybody from Rachel Maddow to Hillary Clinton to everybody else. Your point about why doesn't he clarify? That's always been his MO. He doesn't like to back off of it. He has forced a conversation, by the way, on the auto industry. People in Michigan.
You don't want to talk about bloodbath. This is what you do well.
No.
You don't want to address the issue of bloodbath. You want address the issue of the bloodbath.
Look, I'm happy to address it. It's a term that's used. You can use it in a narrow way, saying something that was killing.
It should not be used, Ed.
It's used all the time.
But not all the time. Ed, I don't think many people take Donald Trump lightly when he says this. I think they believe there's something more subtle that he's saying. Why not just say, I don't mean it. I don't mean I want people to go to war and fight over me if I don't win. I was just talking about the auto industry. Why not just say, clarify and move on? Why not?
But why? Why play the game of the media that does gotcha?
Because he wants to be president, and a president should be held to the highest of standard, Ed. That's why. That's why. To heal the nation, not to further divide it, Ed. That's why.
Nobody's divided by a phrase at a rally.
You may not be divided, but everybody's not you, Ed.
Well,
why can't you just say you should not use bloodbath? Why can't you just say that?
I wouldn't use bloodbath.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank Mayor Muriel for joining us. Joel, Ed, thank you. I'm Armstrong Williams. Enjoy what remains of your weekend.